What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Jacked Ramsays. Danny Marang here. No Brandon Sprague. He's dying. He has no voice, which is perfect timing because that means I get Trailblazers general manager Joe Cronin all to myself. Joe has graced us or willingly given us some time here in a very, very busy part of the schedule. Joe, thank you for joining us, man.
Thank you for having me, Danny.
Hey, listen, anytime that is the general manager of the Trailblazers, the buck, so to speak, obviously stops with you when we come into player personnel and transactions. And this is a off season that you yourself hinted at. We had you on at the beginning of last season, kind of frame what this season was going to look like. We talked about the two timelines and how you kind of, the biggest thing for you was you wanted to see who could play with Damian Lillard. Starting there and then working our way forward real quick, what did you learn about this season about who can and can't play with Damian Lillard?
Mm-hmm. Well, I learned quite a bit. I mean, the initial thing, where we didn't have a lot of data was the Anthony-Dame combo, where, those two had obviously played together for 4 years previously, but not in the sustained role where it's, both guys starting, both guys playing, north of 25 minutes together per night. So seeing that combo and that interaction and how those two learn to feed off of each other, on both sides of the ball, I thought that was good to see. It was for Anthony, it was last year he didn't have a huge body of work. So going into this year and seeing him put together a really complete 60 games, I thought that was, one really good dynamic for us to see, just those two, how they jive, on and off the ball together. The other thing, that we had no data on was Jeremy Grant coming in. So Jeremy, I thought he just blended in seamlessly, basically right from the get-go, right during training camp. A lot of it, is his game is so versatile and so adaptable, but also just Jeremy's personality, his competitiveness, his unselfishness, his, team first approach, like that stood out to us right away. So Jeremy's interaction with the new group and how quickly he acclimated, I thought was really encouraging.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So
those two things, yeah.
The next question, I think, in that iteration is, as it pertains to Damon Ant, is that to make improvements to this team, you're likely going to have to look at trades with Anthony or Shaden or one of your starters if you're going to drastically improve the team, or depending on where you guys land in the draft lottery. When you look at this right now and you look at the data that you did have between Damon and Ant, are you comfortable going forward with Damon and Ant as the backcourt pairing?
Very. I think those two give us one of the most dynamic backcourts in the league. With that, we've got to do our due diligence, in balancing out the roster and filling out our starting lineup, So I think we're going to look at all kinds of different vehicles to acquire players, whether it's the draft, free agency, trade. We've got to cast a really wide net and get, not just as top heavy and as talent laden as possible, but also start building like quality depth. So, that's what last season was about for us. It was, we were still in talent acclimation mode. And I think we've acquired quite a bit of talent. Now, I don't think we're comfortable with our talent level. We want to keep pressing forward, but also at the same time, we want to start building a roster that really fits with each other. And I think that starts with, our depth and, some of the mentalities that we add. We've got to get, some playoff ready basketball players.
One of the things that I looked at, I want to say it was about a month before the season ended, was the weighted average age of the team. And looking at it, it was, I want to say, around 20 or 40 days older than the Cleveland Cavaliers, whose only starter over the age of 25 is Donovan Mitchell. And yet you had 32-year-old Damian Lillard and 28-year-old Yusuf Nurkic and Jeremy Grant. One of the things you talked about in the exit interview was getting veterans. With so much youth on your roster right now, how do you get more veteran laden? How do you have a team that looks more like Sacramento right now, or I hesitate to use Golden State because they have a lot of youth as well, but a team that takes a step basically out of nowhere into hyper competitiveness because of one, top end talent, but two, veteran and experienced talent behind it.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get really active in the trade market and in free agency, and start shuffling the deck a little bit. Like we've got to, last year for us, we were extremely young, especially on the outskirts of our rotation, the 8 through 14 guys. And we've got to shuffle a little bit of that at least to where we're, acquiring these playoff ready veterans that can not just perform during crunch time, but also, fill in during the rough patches of the season. If we have an injury, that's where, last year we didn't have more injuries than most teams. We just had consistent, untimely injuries, and we didn't have the depth to sustain them. And I always felt like if we had a guy or two go down, it just really affected our second unit, as we're challenging those second unit guys. Okay, some of them become starters, and then the guys behind them, we just didn't have enough guys that were ready. So our challenge this offseason, among many challenges, is to build that quality depth, some of which has to come from more veteran leadership.
Now, I wanted to ask you about some CBA questions, but the CBA has not been ratified, so technically you cannot answer them. So everybody who's asking about them, I'm not dodging your questions. Joe legally cannot answer them. They will get in trouble. But a question that I have gotten that it doesn't pertain to the CBA, but does pertain to the money side of things. The team has avoided the luxury tax the last 2 years. And with a team that is rebuilding, I think it's something you can justifiably tell fans. You're not going to invest heavily in a team. To compete with Damian Lillard, you need to invest heavily. To re-sign a Jeremy Grant, it's going to cost a lot of money. Anthony Simons is already signed. Shaedon Sharpe is under contract. But if you're bringing another veteran, you're going to flirt with, at bare minimum, and more than likely get over the tax line. Is ownership comfortable paying for the luxury tax for the team that needs to compete?
Definitely. And I think, and Jody's shown that willingness to do so, I mean, almost throughout her tenure here. I think, what was it, 3 years ago, we had the highest payroll in the league. 2 years ago, we were pretty deep into the tax before we took a step back out of it. So for Jody, I mean, she's terrific, and she's such a great partner where she's dumping resources into this organization left and right. And, one of the biggest commitments, of course, is the luxury tax. And when the time is right, I think we'll definitely won't shy away from that.
One of the questions that was asked repeatedly in here is if there's any movement or news on a potential G League franchise for the Portland Trail Blazers.
It's something we're having a lot of discussion about, both internally and externally, just trying to figure out what situation makes the most sense and the timing of everything. But from Jody on down, it's something we really support and believe in, and we're hoping we can get something done.
When you look at, again, I know you can't speak on other players, but when you look at a franchise like the Kings and what they have done, they were a team that was not expected to be anything at best flirting with the 10th seed. Does that give you some kind of hope, strength, belief, framework for getting this team to that point? And as it pertains to that point, when you talk about a team that is competitive for Damian Lillard, I have often thrown around, I don't think Damian Lillard needs to have the 2016, 2017 Warriors to compete. The idea of the 2014-15 Trailblazers, Dame, West, Nick, LaMarcus, Robin, that team. When you're talking about being competitive, you're in the sliding scale of that Blazers team to the Warriors, kind of what is the hope as far as what you're trying to achieve this summer?
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, the Kings, they're a great example and an inspiration to a lot of teams where you can make, a handful of fairly significant moves and play with the right style and spirit, and it will take you a long way. I think it points to this league. It's interesting right now, just the competitive balance portion of it. Like, we've seen more parity this year, especially in relation from the really high end teams, say the teams with the best records in the league, to the median and on down, where, the gap has been this year as small as we've seen since probably the early 80s. So I think you see that around the league where a lot of teams are looking around saying, look, we've got a chance here if we get some of this right. And to your point, sometimes it doesn't have to be a home run. You may not have to build a super team in order to compete at the highest level. It's, can you put the right pieces together that really jive, like a Sacramento team?
If I don't ask you this question, I feel like I'm going to get stabbed in public. Do you think Shaedon Sharpe has shown enough to be considered a starting caliber player next year?
Yeah, I think he's, the question you have when anytime a player pops late or you don't get a ton of, sample size out of what happened, for Shaedon, he played extremely well for 10 games. And, I'm a natural scout. So for me, I'm always looking at, okay, what's the high end? Show me what this player is capable of. And then I'll try to guess whether he can sustain it or not. So I think the big question is, how consistent can he be and how sustainable is that consistency early on in his career? I don't think there's any concerns long-term as to, whether he's going to be a good player or not. But I think next season for him, he's fully capable of being a starting level caliber two guard in our league. He's as talented as they come. He's mature beyond his age as far as his approach, his mentality, his ability to pick things up, the versatility in his skill set, his being able to play both sides of the ball. He has quickly blown through some of the issues that a lot of rookies, 19-year-olds, even players in their rookie contracts, these guys struggle with this for multiple years at times. And Shaedon's just so capable that I wouldn't put anything past him. I think he's capable of getting to be as good as he wants to be. And I don't think being just a starter is even close to his ceiling.
When you look at this team right now, if there's one thing, I know there's multiple things you want to address, but if there's one thing that is front of mind outside of the idea of giving Damian Lillard a competitive team, what is the one functional thing that you want to improve most with this roster?
Well, the number one thing, it is putting a functional team around Dame. We want to be as good as possible, or be as good as we can be as quickly as possible. So to do that, we need to fill a lot of gaps and plug a lot of holes and fix a lot of issues with the roster. I think I talked a little about this earlier, where we've got to continue to get more talented. There's, you watch these playoffs and they're rolling out 7, 8, 9 really good basketball players. So I think that's our challenge. It's finding 2, 3, 4, 5 guys, whatever, that count is, to get to 9 or 10, plus the quality depth behind that to weather the storms. But let's say a handful of really good basketball players that not just are capable, but fit well with this, this group and with Chauncey's system and with what we're trying to build.
One of the things you and I talked about was that dual timeline and threading that needle. How confident are you that you can put together a team that heads into next season, barring health, that is a top 4, top 5 seed in the West?
Mm-hmm. We're confident we can get better. And we're confident that if we put the right group of guys around Dame and Jeremy and Anthony and Shaedon and all these guys that we're starting to build with, that, the ceiling's pretty high. We're a team that, we're not going to be afraid to play any of these teams in the West in the playoffs if, we do our job right this summer. And that's our big challenge. And, we're ready for that. And we're optimistic that we can get some stuff done.
I'm going to get you out of here on this one. This is more of a theory question. This is from Jeff Kramer, CBA guy. I think you actually know him.
That's storyteller, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He asked, coming into your position as a current member of the staff versus coming in from the outside, what are or were the pros and cons that you've kind of picked up over the last 2 years?
Yeah. Pros are just your intimate knowledge of the organization, whether not just existing staff or existing players or those kind of things, but also just the history of this organization, the passion of the fan base, the, you know, the intricacies of the city and all these things. So like it's really easy for me to sit down and talk to a player or a staff member that I'm recruiting and talk about the Trailblazers organization. I've been here almost longer than everybody, to where I can, talk about the days with Brandon Roy, or I can talk about, what it was like when Damian Lillard first got here, or I could talk about how great this fan base has been since I got here in 2006 and the changes we've seen over time. So I think that institutional knowledge is probably the pro. The con would be sometimes, it's hard when you start like I did. I started as an intern, and just kind of slotted my way up step by step by step and just really grinded it out. Sometimes you are still viewed as that person that, first started. You're viewed as the intern, or you're viewed as a scout, or you're viewed as a cap guy. So I think it can be difficult for any person that's in the same place for too long to not be typecast in certain roles. But I give myself credit, and I give this organization credit for seeing what I was capable of beyond, what I was asked in the past. I think they saw my potential, and it shows a lot of foresight and in-depth study of me in order to, believe in me to give me this opportunity.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to have you on for a few minutes. I want to let you get out of here because I know you're about to be a very busy man. I lied. I've got one last question for you. I think this is kind of a quick one. Have you decided who's going for lottery day yet?
Yep, decided.
You want to tell us who it is?
Nope, not yet. We're going to come up with a cool way to announce it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We will look to revisit, I think, after the lottery, kind of catch things up. Excuse me, after the draft, and catch up with hopefully after a bunch of moves, and then we'll circle back then. Thanks again, Joe.
Thanks so much for having me.